over, under, or straight through the middle? It is a simple-sounding question, but it has challenged every great engineer since ancient times. We like highways and railroads to be straight and level, but earth bumps and wiggles make that kind of construction an amazing challenge. How do you take a highway through a valley, or make a railroad cross a creek?
So, pleasant morning to one and all. It's me, Tanush Poddar, a student of 11th A, who will be going to tell you all about bridges today. I hope it will be fun learning about bridges.
In the endless war of people versus nature, there will only ever be one winner, but humans can still console themselves with occasional victories, which is what the world's greatest bridges represent. Whether we need to cross rivers or valleys, connect islands to the mainland, carry cars, people, or waterways, bridges are a brilliant solution whenever nature gets in our way. While it's easy to discuss bridges in this fairly abstract and theoretical way, it's much more interesting to look at some specifics by examining each major type of bridge in turn.
Forces make things move, but they also hold them still. It's far from obvious, but when something like a skyscraper looms high above us or a bridge stretches out beneath our feet, hidden forces are hard at work. A bridge goes nowhere because all the forces acting on it are perfectly in balance. Bridge designers, in short, are force balancers.
The biggest and most pervasive force in the universe, gravity, is constantly tugging things down, which isn't such a problem for a skyscraper because the ground underneath pushes straight back up again. But a bridge spanning a river, valley, sea, or road is quite different. The huge deck has no support directly beneath it. The longer the bridge, the more it weighs, the more it carries, and the bigger the risk it'll collapse. Bridges certainly do fall from time to time, and quite spectacularly, but most stand happily still for years, decades, or even centuries. They do it by carefully balancing two main kinds of forces called compression and tension, channeling the load onto abutments and piers. Although there are many kinds of bridges, virtually all of them work by balancing compressive forces in some places with tensile forces elsewhere, so there's no overall force to cause motion and do damage.
If a bridge is unloaded, all it has to do is support its weight, so the tension and compression in its structure are essentially static forces, changing little from hour to hour or a day to day. However, by definition, bridges have to carry changing amounts of weight as the load is passed by. Bridges also have to bear ever-changing environmental forces. Arch bridges over rivers, for example, have to cope with water backing up behind them. Suspension bridges that carry cars tend to bear the same loads all day long, though, often sited in windy estuaries, they also have to endure squalling gusts of wind, which can set up a twisting force, called torsion, in the bridge deck. Modern suspension bridges tackle this problem by having decks with aerodynamically designed cross-sections, tested in wind tunnels, and may be reinforced with trusses underneath. Loads that cause a bridge to move back and forth can be particularly dangerous if they make it vibrate wildly at its so-called natural or resonant frequency.
While it's easy to discuss bridges in this fairly abstract and theoretical way, it's much more interesting to look at some specifics by examining each major type of bridge in turn.
A beam is the simplest and often cheapest kind of bridge, a deck, spanning a relatively short distance, held up by a pair of abutments. The load on a bridge like this is transmitted through the beam to the abutments at either end, which is also compressed. The longer the beam, the more likely it is to sag in the middle, which is why basic beam bridges are usually quite short.
Arches are the only kinds of bridges supported entirely by forces of compression. There is some tension underneath an arch, but it's usually negligible unless the arch is large and shallow. That makes sense if you think about it, because an infinitely wide arch would just be a horizontal beam, with its lower side in tension. A bridge deck resting on an arch pushes down on the curve of stones underneath it, squashing them tightly together and effectively making them stronger. The load on a stone arch bridge is transmitted through the central stone, around the curve of other stones, and into the abutments, where the solid ground on either side pushes back upward and inward. Viaducts and aqueducts are often variations on arch bridges, with multiple arches side by side.
One way to extend the reach of a basic beam bridge is to reinforce it, and engineers have found the best way to do that is with a system of diagonal, triangular bars on the sides, which are called trusses. There are many ways of arranging trusses to support a bridge, giving a variety of intricate and often attractive lattice patterns. Lenticular trusses, used in the Royal Albert Bridge. A typical truss bridge looks like a hollow box with open or closed vertical sides and roof, the sides reinforced with diagonal trusses, and the base resting on girders.
Two back-to-back beams extending outward from a pier can balance one another, just as a tightrope walker can balance by holding both arms straight out from her body. That's the basic idea behind the cantilever bridge. In a cantilever bridge, there's usually a pair of cantilevers extending from each pier, with a short beam bridge in between, linking them together. Alternatively, some have a cantilever extending out from each abutment toward the middle, with a beam bridging them. Cantilever bridges are sometimes hard to recognize because they're typically reinforced with girders and trusses, but easier to spot if you remember that they have multiple sections and often have at least one pier in the middle.
If you need a bridge that spans even further, a suspension bridge of some kind is the only option. The genius of a suspension bridge lies in using very tall piers with huge, curving main cables strung between them. Dozens of thinner vertical suspension cables of varying length hang down from the main cables and support the immense weight of the deck and the loads it carries.
A big drawback of suspension bridges is that they need to be anchored to the ground on either side. That's not always possible if there isn't room for the cables or appropriate bedrock to anchor them into. A different kind of suspension bridge, known as a cable-stayed bridge, does away with this by balancing two sets of suspension cables on either side of each pier, which supports the load. In a normal suspension bridge, the deck hangs from cables of varying lengths that are themselves supported by the immensely strong main suspension cables. In a cable-stayed bridge, there's only one set of cables that fan out, diagonally, from each pier to the bridge deck, which tends to be stronger and bulkier than in a suspension bridge. Cable-stayed bridges are significantly shorter than conventional suspension bridges and generally don't span distances much greater than 1 kilometer.
Boats float on water, so if you need to build a temporary bridge in a hurry, floating a deck on a series of boats is one possible solution. A floating bridge like this is called a pontoon, and it's widely used by the military for improvised river crossings. Well-organized armies have pre-built sections of pontoon bridges that they can float into place and bolt together, wherever and whenever they need to. The main problems with pontoon bridges are basic instability and the relatively light loads they can carry. Since the deck floats very close to the waterline, a pontoon bridge automatically blocks boats from using a river, though it's usually possible to detach a section or two from the middle and float it aside to let river traffic navigate through.
In a through-arch bridge, just like with a conventional stone or brick arch, the ends of the arches push outward and need pushing back by the abutments. Bridges like this are sometimes called thrust arches for this reason. Just as a cable-stayed bridge is more self-supporting than a suspension bridge, because it does away with the anchoring cables, so bowstring bridges are more self-supporting than a conventional arch because they have less need for sturdy abutments.
Conventional bridges are impractical if something like a low road has to cross a river or canal through which tall boats need to pass. In that case, we need a mechanical bridge with a deck that can lift or swing aside whenever necessary. There are many examples of swing bridges all over the world. Some have two moving parts that swing to the sides, leaving a central channel clear, others swivel on central support to open up one or two clean channels of a waterway on either side. I would like to expose my personal thanks of gratitude to my physics ma'am, as well as our principal ma'am, class teacher ma'am and coordinator ma'am, who gave me the golden opportunity to do this astonishing project on the topic bridges, which also encouraged me in doing a plenty of research and I came to know about so many new articles. I am thankful to them. Secondly, I would also like to thank my parents, who assisted me a lot in finalizing this project within a limited time frame. So, this was from my side. I believe you must have savored this presentation and must have learned many new things and concepts. If yes, Do check this video out yourself, once, with your family. This much for today.